Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and I want to say thank you for all the great response on my father-in-law's 34 Plymouth Coupe video. This thing, I just put it together kind of for the fun of it, and it's really taken off and it's been quite popular. So I want to do a quick update because all the work that I did on it has been well over a year ago, and I still had some plans to make it drive better, make it a little safer, and I wanted to show you some updates of things that I've done so far. Of course, I still have another, a long list of things to do, but I wanted to give you a quick update on where we're at with it. After I got it running and everything, that was just on battery power. It had no charging system. Even though the old generator was bolted to the engine, it actually wasn't hooked up. So I wanted to rejuvenate that, make this thing where we could drive it a longer distance and be able to run, headlights and whatever else we want to do as far as electricity goes. So I put a PowerMaster Power Gen alternator on it. It looks just like an old generator, but it's actually a high amp one-wire alternator. That was a pretty easy bolt on. I actually used original style brackets instead of the low mount bracket that Charles had. That allowed me to easily bolt it on, find a belt that fit just right, and make this thing work like it should and have plenty of adjustability. The low mount bracket had basically no adjustability, so according to PowerMaster, they require a certain amount of tension in order for that generator alternator to work. So I wanted to have plenty of adjustability so I could do it by the book. So while I was fooling with charging system stuff and while I was dealing with PowerMaster, I got a new starter. So this car has a kind of an odd starter setup. Instead of the typical small block Chevy starter that bolts to the block, this actually bolts to the bell housing. It has an early 60s aluminum bell housing, and they're known for not holding up very well, but this one is still in great shape, and I wanted to be able to use that original style starter. Luckily, PowerMaster makes one, and not only is it the original look, but it's actually a high torque starter. So this thing fires up a lot easier now. It's a little easier to spin it over, and I know that that thing will last a long time. While I was fooling with charging system stuff, I put brand new battery cables. This car has a battery in the back. I put an Optima red top in there and cleaned all the connections, cleaned everything, put new terminals on there, just so that this thing would be brand new front to back as far as its charging system and wiring is concerned. Another thing I did on this car that's a little bit sneaky, but I wanted to retain the original look of this old Chevy GMC combo master cylinder. Those master cylinders are for brakes and clutch. So that means that one pot is for brakes, meaning that it's a single reservoir, and we all know that that is not safe for driving. I know people drove like that for years and years, but I also know that this car is old and anything can happen, and if a wheel cylinder, a brake line, anything like that happens, it's going to evacuate all that fluid and you're going to have no brakes. So I wanted to have a dual reservoir master cylinder on this car. Well, I didn't want to have a big old dual reservoir master cylinder sticking out here like a sore thumb, so I wanted to come up with a way to hide a brand new master cylinder and keep this old one as a dummy. The way I did that was with a Kugel Components brake pedal assembly that turns the brake 90 degrees under the dash. So this thing's got this huge cowl that's really deep. That gives us a lot of room to work with under there. And I did my measurements. I made sure that this was going to work. And I ordered the kit. It uses Wildwood master cylinder and a Wildwood clutch master, and then I made the lines and everything and tucked them in to the cowl here so that you don't see them. I can actually build a little kick panel to put over that and you'll never see the hard lines. Another issue with the old combo master cylinder is that it has a 1 1/8 inch bore, and that is extremely hard to push. Now, it wasn't bad in the trucks originally because they had really long pedals and you had a lot more leverage. Well, this thing has short pedals and you had to really push hard. In fact, we had to brace the pedal so that it wouldn't bend. So I went with a Wildwood dual master cylinder which has a 7/8 inch bore. That will make pedal effort much easier, and it's a dual reservoir, so we're safe as far as the front to rear split. I did have to add a couple of extra lines and fittings underneath to make it all work, but it really wasn't that big a deal. So the pedal assembly has sort of a bell crank. Any motion that you push on the pedal, it transfers it 90 degrees to the push rod for the master cylinder. So that's really cool in our situation where we don't have a ton of room, but we've got enough to have that brake assembly and the master cylinder kind of sideways in the car. The clutch master is actually 180 degrees, so it's actually pointing backwards because it's a much smaller master cylinder. There's not quite as much space requirement. So I did the pedal assembly install for a Street Rodder magazine tech article, and while I was doing it, I just couldn't get past the kind of goofy arrangement for the throttle pedal in this car. It was just, the pedal was up on top of the transmission tunnel and it just wasn't comfortable to drive, and that's something that you can't really figure out until you drive it. So anyways, I knew that I needed to do something about it, so I again did some measurements and figured that I could cut out part of the tunnel, and there was actually plenty of room between the transmission and the tunnel, and make a new panel to be able to recess my throttle pedal down into that aluminum panel. And then after I had my buddy Kyle weld it all up for me, I pop riveted it in place, and honestly I love how it looks. It looks like an old race car. So I do have a few more plans down the road. I want to try to make the car drive a little better, so I'm going to work on the suspension, and I'd like to retain what Charles built in the 60s to the best of my ability, but add a few things to it to try to stabilize the rear end and make the steering a little more responsive. So I've got some plans for that. I'm also planning on scooting the front axle forward a little bit to try to help the weight balance and help the proportions of the car a little. So I've got a plan for that as well. I'm going to use a 32 style axle. Where this car has a 40 Ford frame, the axle is actually behind the spring, and a 32 style axle, the spring is directly above the axle, so that gains me about 4 inches. So that'll help the proportions, it'll help it ride a little better, it'll help it handle a little bit better, and go down the road a little smoother. That's pretty much it for now. I'm still chipping away at this thing and some of the other projects in the garage. And as I continue to make progress, I'll post updates, and hopefully we'll get a video of this thing driving down the road soon, and we can test out all these upgrades.